Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to the EduSat Network. Our topic of discussion today, friends, is going to be a continuation from a previous lecture of ours. So very interestingly, you could also go and watch the previous one on YouTube. And so friends, today we are going to talk about beginnings of classical art, and as I mentioned, today is going to be a second part of Gandhara art. And friends, to take up this topic further, we have the same subject expert, Dr. Seema Bawa, Professor, Department of History, University of Delhi. And with this brief introduction, I welcome ma'am to the studio. Ma'am, thank you so much for coming.
Hello. We discussed basically the last time that what exactly is the region that is Gandhar and how it is a geopolitical entity that is very important because of the fact that it is at the crossroads of cultural and economic and political interactions. And secondly, we had also discussed what are the stylistic features of Gandhar art. We had kind of discussed as to what makes it so distinct and what is the chronology largely of the Gandhar art and how it starts from before the Common Era and goes up till 4th and 5th century CE, after which we see remnants of Gandhara art, but matured Gandhara art is not to be found in that profusion after 5th, 4th and 5th century CE. We had also looked at some of the background in terms of urban centers and the kind of ethnic and cultural contacts that were there between Indo-Greeks, Bactrians, Parthians, and the indigenous populations, and how these were all amalgamating in this particular region which extends from between Oxus to Indus. So, this is a very specific region and this is not a site. This is a region. Gandhar is a region, like Mathura is a site, Amravati is a site, Bharut is a site, Sanchi is a site. Gandhar is much more than just one site. We have numerous sites and sub-schools also in Gandhar. We'd also kind of laid the background of how it is not an homogeneous art, that there are various developments that take place. The two major art objects that were being produced in the Gandhar art were of the Buddha and the Bodhisattva, which we have discussed. Today we will go a little further and discuss one very important development, which was the development of Gandhar art under the Kushanas, which was a distinct category of patronage that was taking place both in Mathura and in Gandhar. So, you have two parallel schools coming up of art. One is in the northwestern region and one is in the northern region around western UP, Punjab, Haryana and those areas. So, what is it that makes them distinct and why is it coming up and what are the evidences that we are getting about the Kushan patronage to Gandhar art is something that we will do. Especially what we are going to look at today is how there is a transition from Indo-Greeks to Kushans in history and art, that this area is something that sees waves of Indo-Greeks, Indo-Scythians, Indo-Parthians and Kushans, and interestingly, unlike say Alexander before this or Darius the First, Achaemenid king, these powers were focusing on the subcontinent. That is, they were focusing on northwestern India in terms of polity. They were trying to have their own coins, their own inscriptions, their own administrative units called the satraps and satrapies, called satrapies, which were being ruled by their own people called satraps, and they had their own distinct cultural activity here. This cultural activity was something that was very distinctly subcontinental in content. If the styles were being borrowed and then made into a subcontinental art style, but the content was very subcontinental. Secondly, and more importantly, that in terms of religion, they may have had, when they were in Central Asia, they may have had animistic traditions, okay, that they were worshipping animals, they were worshipping nature, and distinctly non-theistic religion, okay. But when they come to India and enter the, by India I mean undivided, larger entity, geographical entity which existed in ancient India, okay. So here when they come into this territory, we see that they embrace a lot of Indian faiths and they are declaring themselves to be Bhagavats, that is worshippers of Vishnu, right, Shaivite. So we see a lot of emblems that are Shaivite in content. Then they, of course, there is a lot of Buddhist activity in this time, and some local faiths were also being patronized by, from Indo-Greeks, Gondophanes, Menander, to the Kushans. So there is a long line of people who are embracing, patronizing and making objects of art that are related to very Indian faiths, okay. Most of the major Buddhist centers of Gandhar were founded during the 2nd century AD under the powerful kings such as Kanishka. There is an increase in the patronage of Buddhist sacred areas and monastic institutions, and most of the extant Gandharan architecture dates from 3rd century onwards. This includes the sites of Taxila as well as other massive monastic institutions of Takhte-Bahi, Sahari Bahlol, Jamalgarhi, Ranikhat and Thareli. So, late Kushan period onwards also we see that not just individual small stupas, but stupas with large monastic institutions are also now being patronized by the kings, and we have very large, okay, I think we need to go to the we have a very, very large amount of work that can be seen here in terms of art and architecture. Now, since Kushans are so important during this time, we will be looking at one king, Kanishka, because it is under him that Buddhism especially becomes extraordinarily important. Under him he becomes a Buddhist himself, though of course his inscription suggests that there are a lot of Central Asian and Iranian elements in his religion, but under him a lot of Buddhist literature gets written. It is also during his time that the 4th Buddhist Council is held in Kashmir, and a formal division between the Hinayan and Mahayan takes place. But Kanishka also is important because we find a number of antiquities related directly to Kanishka himself, and he can be related to Gandhara art and is patron of Gandhara art almost directly. So, the rule of Kanishka, who is the 3rd major Kushan emperor, and his dates are controversial. Some people date him to the 1st or to the early mid 2nd century AD, and he administered his empire from 2 capitals. One was Purushpura, which is now called Peshawar, near the Khyber Pass, and the other is Mathura in northern India. Under Kanishka's rules, at the height of the dynasty, Kushan dynasty controlled a large territory ranging from the Aral Sea through the areas that include present-day Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, northern India, Banaras, and as far south as Sanchi. which is in Madhya Pradesh, near Bhopal. It was also a period of great wealth, marked by extensive mercantile activities and a flourishing urban life, Buddhist thought and visual arts. The Gandhara region at the core of the Kushan Empire was home to multi-ethnic society, which was tolerant of religious differences and produced an eclectic culture, vividly expressed in the visual arts produced during the Kushana period. I am going to discuss one particular object which epitomizes this multi-ethnic, multi-religious, political and religious authority of the Kushans in relation to Gandhara art. And this is the very famous Kanishka reliquary, which is being, which was found at Shahji Ki Dheri. This was discovered in 1908, 1909 at Shahji Ki Dheri, which is during an excavation in a deposit chamber under the monumental Kanishka Stoop. There is an inscription in Kharoshti which reads, Maharajasa Kanishkasa Kanishkapure Nagare Aya Gada Kare Deya Dharme Sarva Satvanahita Suha Artha Bhavatu Mahasenasa Sagharake Dasa Aghisala. Now this is controversial. Some read it as Agnishala, some have read it as Aghisala. Navkarmi Anna Kanishkasa Vihare Mahasenasa Sangharame. Now, in the town of Kanishkapura, this perfume box is the pious donation of the architects of the fire hall of Mahasen and Sangharakshita in the monastery founded by Maharaja Kanishka. May it be for the welfare and happiness of all beings in acceptance of the teachers of the Sarvastivadi school. So, we know that there is a fire hall, probably this was something that was made by in a temple by Kanishk. Fire hall means that it had Zoroastrian affiliations. We do know that there was a large a large population of Iranians who had brought their beliefs into this. We also have another inscription which also talks about the acceptance and patronage of these beliefs by the Kushanas. It also talks about the building of a monastery by Kanishk. Okay, and it also talks about the fact that this was for the welfare of the Sarvastivada school, which is something that is also there in Sanchi. And we have a lot of people, monks who belong to the school, who are travelling all over north and northwestern India, belonging to this particular school of Buddhist thought and philosophy during the early Christian eras. And with them are travelling Buddhist thoughts, Buddhist art, Buddhist culture, and many such cultural and religious practices. Now, this particular stoop has a literary history also. It is mentioned in literature of or the writings of travellers, especially Chinese travellers who were coming into India, and Fayan, who came in around 400 CE during the Gupta period, says that when the Buddha was travelling in the country in the past, he told Ananda, after my nirvana, after my death, there will be a king named Kanishka who will intend to raise a stupa at this spot. Afterwards, Kanishka was in the world, and when the king was going on tour of inspection, Shakra, that's Indra, who intended that the king's mind be open to Buddhism, was raising a stoop on the road, disguising himself as a little cowherd. "What are you making?" the king asked. He answered the king, "I am making a Buddhist stup." So, what we have here is that you have Fayan, and he is talking about how this stup came into being. And the king, of course, looking at this, started creating a greater stup. Okay? And he built one right over the boy's stup, which was very big and decorated with precious substances, and it had viharas, and Fayan had seen these, and it was of majestic grandeur. It was amongst the best or the grandest stupas of Jambudweep, that is India. Okay. And not only this, but Tang dynastic histories also mention this stup, as does Hyun Sang in his Suyuki. When he is coming into India, he is also coming and looking at the stup, and he mentions the stup. So, there is a literary kind of a history of the stup, which we need to know that there is a history of art that is being recorded, of architecture that is being recorded by people who are coming just after it has been built, and marveling at its size, its grandeur, its massiveness, and the patronage that it is giving to Buddhism. Now, this is the Kanishka reliquary that was found during excavations inside this particular stup that we are talking about. Now, if you will look at this, this is made of gilded copper. Okay? And interestingly, what is a reliquary? In which relics were kept. It is said that in this, bone relics or tooth relics of Buddha himself were kept. Here we see that we have 3 figures on the lid. These represent Buddha right in the middle. As you can see, he has one hand raised in Abhay, and he is seated on what looks like a lotus pedestal. All right, we can see the lotus petals on the lid. On both sides, paying obeisance to the Buddha, we have Indra and Brahma. Both are divine characters, and you can see that their divinity is shown through the halos or the prabhas behind their heads. But interestingly, what we also notice here is that the characteristic features of Gandhara art, which are the wavy hair, the rigid lines of very well defined lines of the drapery, the sanghati on both shoulders, etc., are already here during the 1st century CE. Okay. Besides this, we have the portrait sculpture of the king himself, who probably the king himself, and this can be kind of also seen when we look at various coins, numismatic sources, and even some sculptural sources, that this represents Kanishk. The way he wears his tunic, the boots, and the trousers, as well as the robe, this kind of a scarf, represents the Emperor Kanishk himself. He is surrounded by the sun and the moon gods on both sides. On these coils of the wine, you can see these 2 gods. The coils of the wine are something that you see on the Ushnish at Bharut and at Sanchi, especially at Bharut. Okay? But what you see here are these 2 gods, and these 2 gods are representations not only of Surya and Soma, but they are representations of Iranian gods, Miro and Mao, which are represents sun and the moon. Now, this again is that you have Buddhist Indian elements, you have Iranian Scythian Parthian elements, we have drapery which is of Buddha, which is Greco-Roman in its influence. So, all these influences are getting amalgamated into this reliquary. So, that becomes why it becomes very representative of what we see. Okay. And then we also have here the Buddha surrounded by cherubs with devotees or bodhisattvas all around him. So, that is also something that you see. Now, we are just going to look at another Kushan inscription before we go on to narrative sculptures, which is a very important find in the recent years, which is the Ravatak temple foundation inscription, which was found on a stone plaque, which gives us a genealogy of the king and how Kanishk is actually ordering images of gods to be made. So, there is a reference to patronage of art by the king in this particular region, and this is something that is important, you know. And secondly, he gives orders to make images of not only gods but also of his own ancestors. So, he asks for images of Kujula Cadphises, who is his great grandfather, King Vima Taktu, his grandfather, and Vima Cadphises, his father. Now, interestingly, we have another name which we did not know in the genealogy, which is Vima Taktu, which is coming in the Rabatak inscription. He also talks about temple building. So, not only images but also temples, institutions, architecture is something that is being encouraged by the Kushans, and it says that may these gods who are inscribed here keep the king of kings, Shahnashai, Kanishk the Kushan, for ever healthy, fortunate and victorious. And the king, the son of the gods, was pacifying all of India from the year 1 to the year 6. He was probably conquering a lot of territories during this time. So, the temple was founded in the year 1, then in the 3rd year, many rites of endowment took place, then attendants were attached to this, and he even gave a fortress to the gods and made a canal. This was translated. Okay. Now we come to the second aspect of Gandhara art. We have freestanding sculptures of Buddha and the Bodhisattva, but a large amount of Buddhist art has also been found in and around stupas and viharas in architectural context, and this art is mainly narrative in content. By narrative, we mean that it talks about stories and legends and myths related to the Buddha. While relics remain central to the devotional practices, and stupas came to be embellished with narrative reliefs that recounted the Buddha Shakyamuni's miraculous life and emphasized his physical presence at the site. Gandharan narrative reliefs are distinguished from North Indian narrative reliefs in their emphasis on the linear unfolding of events. Narratives are told within horizontal frames. So, narratives are one after the other, you know, first one thing happens, then another, then next thing, then next thing. So, you do not have a jumbling up of moments from time, okay. So, you have a linear kind of a narrative, one chronological, thematic, etc. Okay. In the emphasis is mainly on Buddha's life, all right. So they depict many scenes from Buddha's life through his birth, enlightenment, first sermon, and Mahaparinirvan are the key events which are also mentioned from the early Buddhist manuscripts that have been found from this region from 1st century BCE. Now, this is something that is now being studied a lot, and this is a new intervention in Gandharan and North-Western studies, which is to look at Gandharan textual tradition, because till now Gandharan art was something that was being emphasized. Recent discovery of a lot of manuscripts or scraps of manuscripts, these are not entire extant manuscripts, but we found some scraps which can be dated to early centuries of the Christian era, and these are Mahayana texts. Quite a few of these are Mahayana texts, and there is an attempt now to look at what is it that is being said in these texts. Are these mentioning the same things that are being done and visualized in art, or is there a kind of a difference between what is being said in literary tradition and what is being said in the visual tradition? And this is something that makes it very interesting and a new kind of a study that needs that is being done, and we need to have a look at that also. Okay. Gandharan manuscripts have several narratives about the Buddha's present and previous lives, with overlaps and surprising discrepancies with motifs in Gandharan Buddhist art. So, they need not be the way say Buddha's birth is described in literature may not be the way it is shown in art. And they supply a valuable written evidence for the emergence and development of Gandharan Buddhist literary traditions in the regional vernacular language of Gandhara. The absence of many of the moments that are mentioned in the Gandharan literary tradition in the visual narratives suggests divergent lines of development of Jataka narratives in Gandhar literary and visual cultures. By this we mean that, perhaps both the visual and the literary culture were borrowing from an oral tradition, but were visualizing this or interpreting it very differently. What was being interpreted by the artists was something that was suited to being shown. What was being interpreted or taken, appropriated from the oral tradition of folk tales of the Jatakas that were being circulated in northwestern India by the people who were writing these down, who were actually codifying these, was different. Maybe they were looking more at the philosophical, metaphysical, hagiographic elements in these texts, in these traditions, oral traditions, and then fixing them in literary textual tradition, while the narratives were looking more towards the visual and the oral practices. Now, if we were to look at some of the events that are being shown, one of the most prominent and oft repeated event is the birth of Buddha. Both the conception and the actual birth. The conception of Buddha, or what is popularly known as the dream of Maya, is something that is slightly less in number compared to the actual birth narratives. Here we see that Maya Devi is lying down and is almost asleep, and she dreams that a white elephant is entering her womb. Actually, it circles her around her 3 times, and then she feels that it enters her womb, etc. This particular narrative is shown before at Bharut and other places, but here it becomes more lively, realistic, and now this is also very interesting, and this is something that is interpreted very, very differently in other places, but this is a kind of interpretation of the dream, or the reading of his horoscope by the court astrologers. You see Buddha's father Shuddhodan on one side, you see the court attendants on one side, and in the middle you see this sage or an ascetic in his dhoti or and non-royal clothes, and he holds this baby, this divine baby. You can see the divinity because of the halo around the head. So it's a very interesting kind of an interpretation. There are other astrologers also who are present, who were invited to predict about the future of this particular event. Okay, so there are other matted jatamukh or jatahari mendicants. All right. Now we come to the depiction of the birth of Buddha. All right. Here, if you were to see, what do we have? We have Maya Devi in the center, okay, and emerging from her side is the baby Buddha, the divine presence of the Buddha. Now this is because this he is a Mahapurush, and Mahapurushes really are not born in an ordinary way, but are born from the side, okay, of the mother. He emerges from the side and is received by the Vedic gods, Surya, Indra, Brahma. Okay. On the other side is the secular side, and you see the attendants of Maya Devi who can be seen. She holds, if you look above, she holds a branch of the tree, the Shala tree. The tradition of the biography say that when Buddha was about to be born, she felt the birth pains and held on to a Shala tree in the forest of Lumbini and gave birth to the Buddha, which you can see here. The other thing that you can notice here is the way in which the narrative is framed. This is very, and the way in which women, the garments that women and men wear, which have been inspired partly by Roman togas and Roman feminine apparel. To an extent, there is some influence of Scythian also. All right. Now, here we have 4 scenes from the birth of Buddha. Okay. In the middle, of course, you can see is basically here, you can see here the birth of the actual birth, the receiving of the Buddha by the gods, etc. Right? There are more of these depictions. I'm taking more examples of these because you can see how popular this particular depiction was. Perhaps this showed, this emphasized the divinity. It also emphasized the importance of the moment when Buddha made an appearance in his final form here. Right? Is it again? Many scenes are not shown anywhere else except in Gandhar, such as this return to Kapilvastu, or are rare in other places. And this is something that you see here in Gandhar, which is the return to Kapilvastu. When the baby was born in the Lumbini forest, after that he came back to his father's palace at Kapilvastu, and this particular depiction is that you see, and you can see the elaborate drapery, the design, the textile designs on it, the little baby. Also, you can see some influence of Mathura art in terms of style here. Then, if we proceed further, it says in the forecast of Buddha's future that in future this baby would leave and he might become a great king, or he might become a great saint, and if he does, he will leave all worldly delights and go. So this is before he leaves the palace. You can see that there are people sleeping. His wife is sleeping, the attendants are sleeping, and there is the palace particularly has been well delineated in terms of architecture. You have various arches, chaitya windows, Indo-Corinthian pillars, and in the middle the prince is getting up from the bed about to depart. So this particular scene narrates that particular moment when he leaves the palace. This is the moment when he leaves the palace and goes away and asks his attendant and his horse Kanthaka to return. So this is Buddha bidding farewell to his horse Kanthaka, who in this case actually kneels down to pay respect to his master, and the master can be seen as a divine presence again with his halo, all right, and that is important. The divinity of Kanthaka, of the importance, the sovereignty is also suggested through the chhatra, all right. Now these are both from Takhte-Bahi probably, so I am just trying to, I have put them together. The one is an earlier instance which is in the life of Buddha, which is his birth, but the second one again is something which is interesting, which is the gift of Anathapindika. In Bharut we see the importance has been given to Anathapindika and his generosity, but here we see that it is the Buddha, okay, and this is a moustached figure of the Buddha, that and his disciples you can see who are being emphasized, and then you have the gift of Anathapindika, who gives the Jetavan by spreading coins to all over the garden in order to buy it, and shows great generosity, who is bowing in obeisance to the Buddha. Okay. So, and what you can see is gold foil. So, this is something that is a Buddhist practice which is still till today being practiced, that anywhere that Buddha's presence is felt, gold foil, जिसको what we call work, okay, gold work is put on the sculpture, the pillar, the stupa by pilgrims. So this was a practice that was there for a long time, all right. Now again, this is from incident from the life of Buddha, which is the offering of a handful of dust, and you can see that again this has been set in some kind of a semi-urban setting, and you have the children, you have the monks, you have the Buddha in two places where he is being offered a handful of dust in his begging bowl, and he is blessing them, and the Buddha as the divine being with his principle, and this is the detail, right, of the same. Right. Now, this is very interesting. This is something that is not really very often shown. This is a very rare kind of a thing, and this is where Ananda intervenes on behalf of women wanting to enter the Sangha. The story is that Mahaprajapati, who was the foster mother of the Buddha, wanted to become a nun, and till then only men were being allowed to enter the Sangha, and Buddha refused thrice. Ananda, his foremost disciple, intervened and said, please let Prajapati and 500 other women who wanted to enter, become part of the Sangha, become stream enterers. And Buddha said, okay, I will allow it. But by their entry, they are reducing the age of the faith or the path that I have created from 1000 years to 500 years. So, he was not in favor of women entering the Sangha, and here you can see that there are these women who are beseeching Buddha to let them enter the Sangha. Then we have the final moment, which is Parinirvan, and this is taken also from mortuary art in the Roman, found in the Roman catacombs. So, that is something that is one of the inspirations here, and this is his death at Kushinagar. This should have come before, but still this is descent from the heaven where he preached to his mother. And when he was coming down at Sankesh from this heaven, the only witness was a nun called Utpalvarna, and you can see this nun here below, and this is very interesting because this is the only nun who's besides Prajapati who's actually shown, and you can see that there are in the heavenly realm there are various gods who are bidding him goodbye, and he is now about to descend the staircase. Before he attained enlightenment, he was frightened by his cousin Mara, who did not want him to attain enlightenment, and he sent his armies to disturb his Buddha's meditations. But Buddha was not scared of this frightful army made up of grotesque beings, and he attained enlightenment, and he touched the earth to be his witness, and that is why you see Buddha seated with his one hand touching the earth in the Bhumi Sparsh Mudra, declaring the fact that he had attained enlightenment. Okay, this is okay. We come now to the Dipankar Jatak. Okay, and we have also some Jataka tales, maybe not as many as you would have in other places, but you do have Jataka tales also being depicted in Gandhar. Here also you can see evidence of gold foil that has been put on the sculpture. What you see is the ascetic Megha, who is the Buddha Shakyamuni in the past life, appears 3 times here. There is the Buddha Dipankar. standing before him throwing flowers. You can see him. He is prostrated himself before the Buddha and is spreading his matted locks so that Buddha can step over him. And third, he is flying in the upper left panel in gesture of veneration. And this is when Buddha, Dipankar is the last bodhisattva, okay? And Buddha Dipankar predicts that in future life this particular ascetic Megha will reach enlightenment in the next life and become Buddha Shakyamuni. So, this is the very, very important to the narrative cycle of attaining Buddhahood as historical Buddha, right? And because it is so important, it has been visualized and shown in many, many forms at Gandhar. And in fact, it is one of the distinct features of Gandhara art. Dipankar Jatak is not visualized in such detail in any other region of early Indian art as it is in Gandhar. Here, here you can see that there is this entire philosophical, metaphysical and narrative that has been shown, where such wisdom, etc., these pledges are also being discussed. This is a very interesting scene in terms of the way it has been composed, with one foot coming out of the frame and the personage in the medallion also being visualized. So, this is again interesting. Now, coming to other Jatakas, this is the Shibbi Jatak. Now, Shibbi Jatak has been shown elsewhere. We see Shibbi Jatak in Goli, in Andhra, basically in and around Andhra Pradesh during this period. But here the actual bargain between the hawk and the dove is something that you see is demonstrated. This is about the generosity of the Bodhisattva. It is about a time when Buddha in his previous birth was the king Shibbi, and he was generous twofold. And the hawk, one day Shakra, Indra and Brahma decided to test his generosity and took the form of a hawk and a dove. And the hawk was about to eat the dove, and the dove fell into Shibbi's lap or his presence, and Shibbi said, "Please don't kill him." But the hawk said, "Okay, what will you give?" The hawk agreed to leave the dove alone only if the king would offer a piece of flesh from his own body, which was equivalent to the weight of the dove. Shibbi was more than happy, but however much amount of flesh was taken out, the dove kept becoming heavier and heavier and heavier, and finally he put his entire self into the scales, and even then the dove was heavier. It was only then that Shakra, Indra, revealed himself and acknowledged the divinity of the Bodhisattva and his generosity. But here you can see the bird, the dove. You can see the weighing scales, the cutting off of the flesh, Indra. Okay, now this is Alambusha Jatak, which is the Rishi Shringa Jatak, which shows how once upon a time one-horned Bodhisattva was born from a doe. We've seen this particular Jataka also as Isimiga Jatak in Bharhut. Besides this, we have various narrative scenes from the life of Buddha arranged on both sides or on sides of stairways, of stupas, of various other monuments, where you see things like the Great Departure, the first sermon, the enlightenment, the quieting of the elephant, Nallagiri. So you can see here, right from the bottom upwards, so many of these scenes have been depicted. All right. Right. Then you have offering of sweet rice pudding by Sujata just before his enlightenment. All right. Besides this, you have interspersion of secular scenes such as wrestling also at times, but you also have scenes such as the offering of honey by monkeys and other scenes from his life. There are other deities besides Buddha and Bodhisattvas and Buddha in his previous life who are shown and depicted and visualized in Gandhara art. This is Hariti. Hariti is a Yakshi and she is also a Buddhist goddess. So she has twin roles. She has the role of protecting children and she has the role of being a Buddhist goddess and who is placed in almost all Buddhist monasteries in the front chamber. This is an inscribed, as we've already mentioned before, inscribed art pieces from Gandhar are very rare, but this is an inscribed Hariti from Gandhar. The icon Hariti bears an inscription of 2 lines and it says that the Hariti should protect the children. All right. It is also dated. It says in the year 291 on the 22nd of the month of Ashar, let the 10th carry up to a bright fortnight. I remember Harati for the protection of this. You would notice that she is surrounded by children. That is because she is also Bahuputrika, that is a person, a woman with many sons. Legend has it that she had 500 sons and Buddha hid one of her sons, the youngest son, under his begging bowl because she was a cannibal and she was frantic. And when Buddha revealed her son, he said that, you know, the loss of one of 500 makes you so angry and so grief-stricken. Think of those who have only 1 or 2 or 5 children. So, since then, she accepted Buddhism and offerings started being made to her and her children in the Buddhist tradition. In a similar way, dressed in a similar way is this royal lady who's simply been called Kambojika. This is Mara's assault. And these are the grotesque creatures who form part of Mara's army. Harati is also seen as not only a deity, but she is also seen as the consort of Panchika, who is actually Kuber. So, he is as Yaksha. In the Buddhist tradition, he is known as Panchika Jambhal, and who is married to Harati. So, this is something that you see, that he is a royal figure and Harati is his consort and she holds a citron in her hand and she has children playing around her. In this particular posture, they have been shown as a very happy domestic couple, or who are also shown in Greco-Roman art. All right. and this is the Mahayana Buddhist triad with bodhisattvas, right. Besides this, we also have a number of bacchanalian scenes from Gandhar, and interestingly, wine drinking and wine making, especially wine making, has also been something that has come across during excavations from Buddhist sites. So, this is something that also Buddhist monks were also making wine, they were perhaps drinking it, but we also have this kind of convivial social scenes where men and women are shown as making wine as well as drinking wine in some kind of festival, perhaps, or a group activity. You can see here that they are holding cups of wine in their hands. There are, besides royal and other figures, attendant figures, there are Buddhist, besides Buddhist, there are also Brahmanical gods. This is Skanda Kartikai, who is a very important and independent deity during this time. We see this in Mathura and we see this also in Gandhar. Similarly, we have a three-headed Shiva, some marine deities or watermen entirely from the classical tradition who are shown carrying paddles. The other medium besides schist or stone is stucco, which is kind of a plaster, and here you see a head of a woman, and this plaster tradition starts from 3rd century onwards only. You also have ivories. These ivories have been found from Begram, which from a palace, perhaps of a royal or a mercantile person. These are pieces of furniture. So, these are tables and these are chair backs, and you can see that a lot of images of Shalbhanjikas, Yakshis, which you see also in Mathura, have been adapted to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture, and we had a look at wonderful paintings as well, and that adds to the interesting aspect of the lecture, of course, very visual appeal. So, friends, we have now had a look at, we've had these 2 lectures on Gandhara art, and of course, we're going to request ma'am to share a bit about what she would like to talk in the future with us, and before we sign out. So, ma'am.
I would like to discuss cave art and architecture, because we have over 800 to 900 caves that were excavated from about 300 BCE to the time of Ellora, So, we have all over eastern to western India, on both sides of the coast, we have so many caves. And what is it that made people excavate these caves? What made them decorate these caves? These are some of the aspects that I think we should also look at. And
definitely. Thank you for sharing, ma'am. And so, friends, we request you to look forward to lectures on cave art, and we will definitely be putting up our schedule soon, so you could have a look at that. So, thank you so much, ma'am, again, and thank you, viewers. Keep watching. Have a wonderful day ahead.